I'm Saraya. And this is the story of how my husband, the man I once believed was my anchor, my confidant, my safe harbor, thought he could outsmart me, thought he could dismantle my world brick by brick, and leave me with nothing. It started subtly, insidiously, with whispers in the dark that I initially dismissed as nocturnal anxieties, fleeting shadows of doubt that flickered at the edges of my perception. Then came the tangible proof. Bank transactions I never made, digital footprints leading to places I didn't recognize, money vanishing from our shared accounts like sand through an hourglass. And finally, a name, a chilling, unfamiliar echo in the quiet corners of my mind, Ilya Moro. A name that felt alien and menacing, a name I had never heard before, yet one that would soon come to define the deepest betrayal of my life. Declan, my husband of 7 years, wasn't merely planning to leave me, to walk away from our shared life, our intertwined dreams. No, his scheme was far more insidious, far more calculated. He was planning to take everything. Every last vestige of our shared existence. Every asset. Every memory he could legally pilfer. He envisioned my crumble, my complete emotional and financial collapse. He saw me as a naive, fragile woman, easily manipulated, easily broken. But he underestimated me. He fatally misjudged the steel forged within my core. Instead of crumbling, instead of succumbing to despair, I moved first. I reacted with a primal instinct to protect, to safeguard what was unequivocally mine. What I had painstakingly built alongside him, or so I thought, and 1 week later, with a precision born of cold fury, his entire meticulously constructed plan backfired, collapsing under the weight of its own deceit. But what was worse, infinitely more painful than the material loss, wasn't just the sheer scale of the betrayal. It was the crushing realization of how long he had been planning it, the countless months, perhaps even years. He had been living a lie, weaving a deceptive tapestry of normalcy around me. It was the sheer volume of lies he had told, the casual ease with which he had maintained his facade. And it was the chilling understanding of the lengths he was willing to go, the depths of his ruthlessness, the calculated cruelty he possessed to utterly destroy me, to erase my very existence from the financial landscape we once shared. I woke up to an empty bed. The silence of the room was stark, amplified by the absence of his familiar breathing beside me. My hand instinctively reached out, brushing against the cold sheets, a silent testament to how long Declan had been gone. A knot of unease began to form in my stomach. At first, I tried to rationalize it, to quell the nascent fear. Maybe he had simply gone to the bathroom. Perhaps he was in the kitchen, grabbing a glass of water, a midnight snack. But as I sat up, rubbing the lingering sleep from my eyes, trying to coax my groggy mind into full awareness, I caught the faint, almost imperceptible sound of his voice. It was low, hushed, deliberately careful, a tone so uncharacteristic of Declan, especially in the dead of night, that it sent a shiver down my spine. The hallway light was off, casting the apartment in an eerie, lunar glow. But a thin sliver of moonlight streamed through the living room window, painting stark, elongated shadows across the polished wooden floor. My stomach twisted tighter, a cold dread seeping into my veins as I slowly, silently, followed the sound, my bare feet padding noiselessly on the cool floorboards. Then, a fragment of his conversation, clear and distinct, pierced the quiet. Just a little longer. She doesn't suspect anything yet. I stopped mid-step, my breath hitched in my throat, a suffocating realization dawning on me. Declan's voice, though hushed, was smooth, reassuring, almost tender, like he was calming someone down, placating them. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the apartment. Who the hell was he talking to? The question screamed in my mind, echoing off the silent walls. I stood frozen, straining to hear more, desperate for context, for any crumb of understanding, but the words that followed were muffled, indistinct, lost in the shadows. His tone dropped even further, barely above a whisper, an intimacy that felt utterly alien and wrong. My fingers involuntarily curled into fists, my nails digging into my palms. This wasn't some late-night work call, a business negotiation Declan had to conduct after hours. Declan never whispered on work calls. He was loud, confident, boisterous even. Hell, he never even cared if I overheard his conversations before, often leaving his office door ajar, his booming voice echoing through the apartment. My mind raced through a dizzying array of possibilities, each one more horrifying, more damning than the last. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely only a few agonizing seconds, I heard his footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate. Panic, cold and sharp, shot through me. I barely had time to dart back into the sanctuary of the bedroom, scrambling into bed before he rounded the corner, his silhouette momentarily blocking the sliver of moonlight. My pulse hammered against my temples as I slid under the covers, feigning sleep, forcing my breathing to be slow, even, rhythmic. A perfect imitation of blissful slumber. A moment later, I felt the familiar dip of the mattress as he climbed in beside me. His weight shifted, settling in, but I kept my breathing steady, my eyes squeezed shut, every fiber of my being taut with suppressed tension. A few agonizing minutes passed, and then he exhaled slowly, deeply, a sigh of utter relaxation, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened, as if his world was perfectly calm and undisturbed. I waited another beat, then turned over, blinking up at him, feigning grogginess. "Where were you?" My voice came out soft, husky with feigned sleep, a perfect performance of an innocent, recently awakened wife. "Bathroom," he muttered without hesitation, his voice still thick with sleep, but already a lie, a carefully constructed deception. "And the phone call?" I pressed, pushing my luck, watching him closely for any tell. Declan barely flinched, his composure remarkable. "Just a client," he said, his tone dismissive, a practiced ease in his voice. "Had to smooth out some details for a case. You know how it is." I stared at him, my gaze unwavering, searching for any flicker of hesitation, any tell in his eyes, a tremor in his voice, anything that would betray his deceit. He met my gaze, his eyes unreadable as always, a carefully constructed mask. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe it really was work. Perhaps my imagination was running wild in the quiet of the night. But that whisper, that chilling sentence, "She doesn't suspect anything yet," echoed in my mind, a persistent, venomous whisper. I swallowed the lump that had formed in my throat, a bitter taste rising. I forced myself to roll over, feigning sleep once more, turning my back to him. My mind was screaming at me, a cacophony of warnings and accusations, but I ignored it, pushing the thoughts away with a desperate strength. Not tonight, not yet. I needed more. I needed proof. The next morning, I woke up before Declan, the first tendrils of dawn filtering through the curtains. He was still fast asleep, his arm draped across the pillow where my head should have been, a ghost of an embrace. I slipped out of bed as quietly as a shadow, the floorboards silent beneath my bare feet. My phone felt heavy in my hand, a conduit to the answers I desperately sought. I padded barefoot to the kitchen, the cool tiles a stark contrast to the burning anxiety in my chest. I didn't usually check our bank accounts. Declan had always handled most of the finances, the mortgages, the investments, the household bills. I had implicitly trusted him, never given it much thought, content to let him manage our financial landscape. But something felt profoundly off now, a persistent, nagging intuition that refused to be silenced. I unlocked my phone, my fingers fumbling slightly, and navigated to our joint banking app. I scrolled through the transactions, my heart rate accelerating with each downward swipe. My stomach tightened, a cold knot forming as I saw them, a withdrawal of 500, then Thurs 200, followed by Sao 750, then a larger one of 2,000. It wasn't one or two isolated incidents. It was a dozen withdrawals, small enough to perhaps escape casual notice, spread over the past 3 months, each one just substantial enough to raise a glaring red flag. Declan and I shared expenses. Of course, the mortgage payments, utility bills, groceries, the mundane necessities of married life. But we also had separate accounts for personal spending, for our own indulgences and hobbies. These transactions, these vanishing sums, weren't for bills, weren't for joint investments we had discussed, and definitely weren't for anything we had ever mutually agreed upon or even acknowledged. I took a shaky breath, my hands tightening around my phone, my knuckles white. Behind me, I heard the faint rustle of sheets, followed by approaching footsteps. Panic surged. I quickly locked my screen, the glow of the phone dimming, and turned to see Declan leaning against the doorway, rubbing the sleep from his neck. "Morning," he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep, a perfect picture of innocent domesticity. "What's for breakfast?" I set my phone down on the counter, forcing a casual air I didn't feel. "I was about to ask you the same thing," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. He smirked, a lazy, familiar smile that now felt like a carefully constructed lie. He stepped forward to pour himself a cup of coffee, the aroma filling the kitchen. "Guess it's your turn then." I watched him take a slow sip, his free hand resting casually on the counter, his eyes half closed. I decided to plunge in, to test the waters. "I checked our bank account this morning." Declan froze for half a second, a flicker of something in his eyes, just long enough for me to register it, to confirm my suspicion. His grip tightened almost imperceptibly around the mug, before he forced a low, hollow chuckle. "And," he prompted, feigning nonchalance, "and there are a lot of small withdrawals," I stated, crossing my arms over my chest, my gaze fixed on him. "Things I don't recognize." He barely hesitated, a testament to his practiced deceit. "Oh, those?" he said with a wave of his hand. "Just small investments. A few business opportunities I'm exploring." "Business opportunities," I repeated, my voice flat, betraying nothing. Declan nodded, setting his cup down. "Nothing to worry about, babe. Short-term gains, that's all. Diversifying, you know." He was lying. I knew it with a sickening certainty, a visceral understanding that bypassed logic. I just didn't know why, or to what extent. The rest of the day, I tried desperately to shake the gnawing unease that had taken root in my gut. But Declan wasn't helping. He was glued to his phone, constantly typing, endlessly scrolling. He took calls in the other room, his voice once again low and guarded. His phone screen was always meticulously face down when he set it on the table, a stark contrast to his previous casualness. And every time I looked at him, every time our eyes met, I felt like there was a thickening, impenetrable wall between us, an invisible barrier that hadn't been there before, and whose construction I hadn't even noticed until now. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the muted ceiling, my mind refused to quiet down. It raced, replaying every whispered word, every suspicious glance, every evasive answer. Declan had always been confident, effortlessly smooth, a man who possessed an uncanny ability to talk his way out of anything, to charm his way through any difficult situation. But I had been with him long enough, shared enough years, enough intimate moments with him, to instinctively know when something was profoundly off, when the carefully constructed facade began to crack. And something was definitely off. I turned to face him. He was already asleep, his breathing steady, rhythmic, his face calm and unlined, the picture of a man with absolutely nothing to hide. I wasn't convinced. A cold, insidious voice in my head whispered the words I had been trying to push away all day, the words that now echoed with chilling clarity. Am I being paranoid, or is something really wrong? The doubt refused to fade, clinging to me like a shroud, even as the morning light, pale and indifferent, filtered through my bedroom window. I had spent the entire night tossing and turning, my mind a relentless carousel of suspicion and fear, utterly unable to shake the pervasive feeling that something was terribly, irrevocably wrong. Declan's voice from the night before, casual and dismissive in its surface tone, yet chillingly calculated in its underlying intent, still echoed in my mind. It was the kind of tone someone used when they were hiding something in plain sight, when they were attempting to normalize the abnormal. I forced myself out of bed, my limbs feeling heavy, disconnected, and went about my morning routine. But my movements felt mechanical, as if I were a puppet on strings. My thoughts, however, were stuck in a relentless loop, replaying every interaction, every red flag, every subtle shift I had unwittingly ignored over the past few months. And then Declan strolled into the kitchen, perfectly at ease, completely unfazed, as if nothing had changed, as if the chasm between us hadn't grown into an unbridgeable canyon overnight. "Morning, babe," he said, pressing a quick, perfunctory kiss to my temple, a gesture that now felt utterly empty. I was thinking, we should probably get our financials in order. Just in case of emergencies. I froze, my fingers tightening instinctively around my coffee mug, the porcelain feeling fragile in my grip. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Our financials," I echoed, carefully trying to keep my voice neutral, unreadable. "Yeah," he said, leaning against the counter, sipping his coffee with an infuriating casualness, like this was just another normal conversation, a mundane discussion about household chores. Like, do you have a full list of your accounts, passwords, assets, that kind of stuff? We should keep everything in one place. For safety, I stared at him, my heart drumming a frantic rhythm in my ears. Declan had never, not once in our entire relationship, shown the slightest interest in my personal finances. Sure, we had a joint account for bills, for our shared expenses, but we always, without question, kept our personal savings, our individual investments, completely separate. It was just the way we had always done things, an unspoken agreement, a fundamental boundary. I swallowed hard, forcing a neutral, placid expression onto my face, masking the storm raging within. I guess I could put something together. I mumbled, trying to buy myself time, trying to process the implications of his request. His lips curved into a small, almost imperceptible smile, but his eyes, just for a fleeting second, flickered a tiny, almost imperceptible tell. He nodded as if it was no big deal, as if he had just suggested ordering pizza, before seamlessly changing the subject entirely. But my mind was already racing, connecting the dots. This wasn't about just in case of emergencies. Declan was preparing for something, meticulously laying the groundwork for a major upheaval, and whatever it was, he didn't want me to see it coming. He wanted me blindsided, unprepared, vulnerable. That evening, Declan was uncharacteristically relaxed, almost unnervingly so. He laughed at the TV, a loud, forced sound, scrolled through his phone with a carefree ease, as if nothing was wrong in his world. He even suggested ordering takeout, a rare indulgence on a weeknight. He was playing the role of the doting, oblivious husband perfectly, flawlessly, and that, more than anything, made my skin crawl. Something had subtly shifted in him, a barely perceptible change in the way he walked, the way he spoke, the very air he carried around him. It was all too easy, too well rehearsed, too theatrical. Then it happened. Declan got up to take a shower, his phone, usually a permanent extension of his hand, conspicuously abandoned on the coffee table. He never left his phone unattended. Ever. My eyes fixated on it, a magnetic pull drawing my gaze. My pulse quickened, a frantic drumbeat against my eardrums. The screen was face down, just as it had been for weeks, a constant, irritating symbol of his secrecy. But then, as if the universe itself was throwing me a lifeline, a desperate, unexpected gift, a notification lit up the screen, a fleeting beacon in the dim light. It was a text message, from a name I didn't recognize, a name that sent a jolt of recognition and dread through me, Ilya Moro. I didn't have time to think, to hesitate, to second, guess myself. I reached for the phone, my hands shaking uncontrollably, trembling with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. As I tilted the screen just enough, just barely, to read the message preview that flashed tantalizingly on the display. The words appeared, stark and damning. Just make sure she stays in the dark. Almost there. My breath hitched, catching in my throat. My chest tightened so fast it hurt. A suffocating constriction. The room suddenly felt smaller, the walls closing in on me, crushing the air from my lungs. Who the hell was Ilya Moro, and what did they mean by almost there? My fingers hovered over the screen for half a second. An eternity in that moment. Just long enough for the wildest, most terrifying thoughts to flash through my mind. Was this another woman, a mistress I never suspected? Was Declan planning to leave me for someone else? Was he hiding money, siphoning off our shared assets? Was he involved in something illicit, something dangerous? I heard the water shut off in the shower, the sudden silence deafening. Panic, cold and sharp, shot through me, an electric current of fear. I quickly, carefully, placed the phone back exactly where it had been, the precise angle, the exact spot. Then I sank into the couch, gripping my knees, my knuckles white, desperate to keep my hands from shaking, to maintain some semblance of composure. A minute later, Declan strolled back into the room, a towel drying his wet hair, completely at ease, humming a tuneless melody. I forced myself to look at him, to meet his eyes. He was so calm, so relaxed, so utterly unaware that I had just seen something I wasn't supposed to. Something that had shattered the fragile peace of my world. "Did you decide on dinner?" he asked, ruffling his hair, a picture of innocent domesticity. I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat almost choking me. "Not yet," I managed to croak out. He grabbed his phone without a second glance, without a flicker of suspicion, unlocking it effortlessly. No hesitation, no tell, like there wasn't a damn thing in the world to worry about. But I knew better now. I spent the rest of the night trying to rationalize what I had seen, trying to twist the damning words into something innocent, something benign. Maybe Ilya was a colleague, a business partner, someone with whom he was genuinely planning an investment. Maybe keeping me in the dark was about something completely different, something innocent, a surprise gift, a secret project he didn't want to spoil. But deep down, in the pit of my stomach, I knew better. The pieces were clicking together, one by agonizing one. The secrecy, the money disappearing, the whispered call in the middle of the night, the way he was suddenly so interested in my finances, in securing access to my private accounts. It all made a terrifying, undeniable sense. I should have confronted him right then and there. I should have screamed, demanded answers, shattered the illusion. But if I was right, if Declan was really hiding something this monumental, something this destructive, then I needed proof, real proof, irrefutable evidence that would leave no room for doubt or denial. So instead, I kept my mouth shut, a silent sentinel guarding my secret knowledge. I let him kiss me goodnight, felt his lips on mine, a deceptive caress. I let him slip under the covers beside me like nothing was wrong, like our world wasn't imploding. And then I lay there, gripping my phone, the screen a dark mirror of my despair, whispering into the oppressive dark, the name a chilling mantra. Who the hell is Ilya Moro? The next morning, the question still haunted me, a persistent, venomous whisper, gnawing at my every thought, eclipsing all other concerns. I moved through my morning routine like a ghost, going through the motions, performing the ritualistic tasks of a normal day, but my mind was locked onto one thing, one name, one burning enigma, Ilya Moro. The name lingered in my brain like an unsolved puzzle, a jagged, mismatched piece that didn't fit anywhere in the familiar landscape of my life, but refused to be ignored, demanded to be recognized. Declan sat across from me at breakfast, perfectly at ease, scrolling through his phone, sipping his coffee, the picture of nonchalant contentment. I wondered, with a cold detachment, if he had any idea I had seen that damning message. If he did, he was a damn good actor, a master of deception. But then, as if sensing my barely suppressed suspicion, he looked up, a bright, practiced smile gracing his lips. "Hey babe, can you sign something real quick?" My heart leaped into my throat, and I nearly choked on my coffee, the bitter liquid burning. "Sign what?" I asked, keeping my voice light, casual, masking the sudden surge of adrenaline. "Just some financial updates for tax purposes," he said, his tone utterly casual, the words sliding off his tongue with practiced ease. He slid a crisp, official-looking document across the table, the papers rustling softly. His tone was casual, yes, but his fingers, resting idly on the table, drummed against the polished wood in an uneven rhythm, a subtle but unmistakable tell. My stomach tightened, a familiar knot of dread, as I picked up the papers, my hands slightly unsteady. I skimmed through the first page, my eyes darting across the dense legal jargon, the impenetrable clauses. But despite the obfuscating language, one thing became painfully, terrifyingly clear. This wasn't about taxes. This was something far more sinister. I flipped quickly to the last page, my eyes scanning rapidly until they landed on the bold, incriminating heading, Property Transfer Agreement. My pulse pounded in my ears, a deafening drumbeat, a frantic warning. My assets, my savings, even the condo we shared, the home I had built, decorated, loved, everything would be moved into his name, legally, irrevocably. I forced myself to look up, my gaze meeting his. Declan was watching me, a careful, almost predatory smile plastered on his face, his eyes glinting with a hidden triumph. "Declan," I said, my voice too controlled, too steady, a testament to the iron grip I had on my composure. "What is this?" His smile didn't falter, didn't even twitch. "It's just a precaution, babe. A legal convenience, really. Nothing changes between us." I stared at him, my grip tightening around the papers, the edges digging into my palms. "Nothing changes," I repeated, my voice rising slightly, betraying a hint of the fury simmering beneath. "You're asking me to sign over everything to you. My entire financial future." "Not everything," he said smoothly, condescendingly, as if that made it better, as if the sheer audacity of his request could be mitigated by a single word. "Just consolidating things for protection. You know, in case something happens." My hands trembled slightly now, not from fear, but from a burgeoning, volcanic rage that threatened to erupt. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This wasn't me reading into things, projecting my anxieties. This was a meticulously planned, calculated maneuver to strip me bare. And he had the audacity, the sheer unmitigated gall, to sit across from me, sipping his coffee, and act like it was nothing, like it was a mere formality. I placed the document back on the table, slow and deliberate, each movement a conscious act of defiance. Then I met his gaze, my eyes unwavering, a silent challenge. "I'm not signing this." His smile twitched, a barely perceptible flicker of annoyance. His jaw clenched for a fraction of a second, a fleeting tightening of muscle, before he let out a short, dismissive laugh, brittle and false. "Saraya, don't be dramatic. It's just paperwork." I held my ground, my posture stiff, unyielding. "Then why are you so eager for me to sign without reading it? Why the rush? Why the secrecy?" His expression hardened, the last vestiges of his charming facade falling away, revealing the cold, calculating man beneath. "You really don't want to do this, Saraya," he said, leaning in slightly, his voice low and controlled, a barely veiled threat. But there was something underneath it, a subtle warning, an implicit menace that sent a chill down my spine. I met his gaze unflinching, my resolve hardening. "Is that a threat, Declan?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his expression morphing into something dangerously unreadable, a blank canvas of malevolence. The smirk he had worn moments ago, the one that had so infuriated me, faded, replaced with an unsettling, chilling calm that was far more unnerving. "I just think you're making this harder than it needs to be," he said, his voice too smooth, too measured, too devoid of genuine emotion. I swallowed my anger, forcing it down, keeping my expression neutral, betraying nothing. He still thought he was in control, that I was just another pawn in his meticulously planned chessboard, easily manipulated, easily defeated. I let the silence stretch between us, thick and pregnant with unspoken accusations, watching him intently. The way his fingers tapped idly against the table, a restless drumbeat. The slight twitch in his jaw when I didn't respond, when I didn't crumble under his gaze. He was waiting for me to react, to get emotional, to panic, to break. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. So I smiled, just enough to make him shift uncomfortably, a subtle ripple of unease crossing his face. "You know what, Declan?" I said lightly, standing up and gathering the papers, bundling them together. "You're right. I do need to think about this. Thoroughly." His eyes narrowed slightly, a flash of surprise, perhaps even confusion. He wasn't expecting that. He was expecting an argument, a fight, a capitulation. But I had already turned away, walking purposefully to the kitchen and placing the documents neatly on the counter, out of his immediate reach. I wasn't going to argue. Not now, not yet. Because now, armed with knowledge and a burgeoning resolve, I was the one in control. The power had shifted, silently, imperceptibly. That night, Declan acted as if nothing had happened, as if the tense confrontation at breakfast had been a figment of my imagination. He moved through our home with an almost theatrical ease, like we were still just another happy, oblivious couple. He made himself a drink, settling into his favorite armchair, watching the news with feigned interest, scrolling through his phone with a nonchalant air, as if he hadn't just tried to con me into signing away everything I owned, everything I had worked for. But as I watched him, a chilling realization settled in my chest like a lead weight, heavy and undeniable. This had never been about saving our marriage, about finding a path back to connection. He wasn't trying to fix things, to mend the irreparable cracks. He was setting up his exit, meticulously planning his grand escape, and he wanted to take everything with him when he left, to leave me truly destitute, financially and emotionally. The next morning, I found him in the living room, bathed in the soft glow of the morning sun, sipping his coffee, like he didn't have a single worry in the world, like the impending storm was merely a distant ripple. But when I sat across from him, settling into the armchair, he glanced up, immediately sensing, with an almost animalistic instinct, that something had shifted, that the air had thickened between us. "We need to talk," he said, setting his cup down carefully. The clink of porcelain against wood unnaturally loud in the quiet room. I tilted my head, feigning mild curiosity, masking the steel resolve that had begun to solidify within me. "Oh," he exhaled slowly, dramatically, as if this conversation was an immense burden, a difficult confession for him, as if he was the one struggling, the victim in this unfolding drama. "I think we should separate." There it was. The words carefully chosen, perfectly rehearsed. Delivered with the practiced ease of a man delivering a well-practiced speech, every syllable perfectly measured, every pause strategically placed. "It's not working anymore," he continued, his tone even, devoid of emotion, a bland recitation of marital clichés. "You have to see that. We've grown apart." I stared at him unmoving, my expression carefully blank. He wasn't asking for a divorce, offering it as a mutual decision. He was telling me it was happening, dictating the terms of our separation before I could even process them. I let a beat pass, then another, the silence stretching taut, pregnant with unspoken truths. Before I finally spoke, my voice calm, almost detached. "You've been planning this, haven't you?" A flicker of something akin to surprise or perhaps a momentary loss of control, crossed his face, gone before I could name it, masked by his impenetrable facade. "It's for the best, Saraya. We've grown apart." Grown apart. That's what he was going with, the convenient, emotionally sterile phrase that absolved him of all blame, that minimized his deceit. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table, my gaze fixed on his. "You mean you want out?" But you want to make sure you don't leave empty-handed. You want to make sure you take everything I've ever worked for with you." His lips pressed into a thin, unyielding line, a silent acknowledgement of the truth, but he didn't deny it, couldn't deny it. I could have screamed. I could have thrown the nearest object across the room, shattered the illusion of calm. But I didn't, because something profound had shifted inside me, a quiet revolution of spirit. A steel resolve, cold and unyielding, had taken root. A strength that hadn't been there before, that had been buried under layers of trust and complacency. So I leaned back in my chair, tilting my head slightly, a small, knowing smile playing on my lips. Then, as calmly, as deliberately as I could, I said the words that would change everything. The words that would shatter his carefully constructed fantasy. I already moved my assets. Declan's entire posture stiffened, a sudden, almost imperceptible rigidity in his frame. His breath hitched, a faint, almost inaudible gasp, not enough for anyone else in the room to notice, but I did. I saw it, registered it, a moment of utter, unmasked shock. "What do you mean?" His voice was too sharp, too controlled, betraying the tremor of panic beneath. I smiled, slow and deliberate, savoring the moment, the dawning realization in his eyes. Exactly what it sounds like. His jaw clenched, a muscle twitching almost imperceptibly. I saw it then, the exact second he realized he had lost, the precise moment his meticulously crafted plan imploded. He had spent months, perhaps even years, orchestrating this elaborate scheme, setting up every little detail, every legal loophole, every deceptive transaction, to ensure he came out on top victorious and wealthy. But he had underestimated me, had seen me as a pawn, a victim. And he hated that. A long, agonizing silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken accusations, with the weight of shattered trust. Then, finally, Declan exhaled sharply, a sound of frustrated defeat, and stood up abruptly. He grabbed his coffee, took a slow, deliberate sip, his eyes never leaving mine. Then he turned to me with a look that sent ice through my veins, a chilling preview of the fight to come. His smile returned, but this time, it was colder, sharper, a predator's baring of teeth. "Calculated?" he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper, filled with a promise of retribution. "You're going to regret this, Saraya." She wasn't sure if it was a genuine threat or a desperate bluff, a last-ditch effort to regain control. Either way, she was ready. Declan had played his hand, had revealed his true colors. Now it was her turn. The morning air felt heavier than usual, oppressive and thick, as I moved through my routine. The coffee tasted bitter, a metallic tang on my tongue, and the silence of the apartment pressed against me like a physical weight, suffocating in its stillness. I told myself I wouldn't let his chilling words from the night before get to me, that I wouldn't allow his thinly veiled threat to penetrate my resolve. But then came the knock at the door. Sharp, measured, official. A sound that jolted me from my stoicism. I set my coffee down carefully, the porcelain mug clinking faintly against the counter, and took a deep, fortifying breath before opening it. A man in a crisp navy blazer stood on the other side, his posture rigid, his expression utterly blank. In his hand he held a thick, ominous-looking envelope. "Saraya Keller?" he asked, his voice flat, devoid of inflection. "Yes." He extended the envelope, his arm unmoving, his eyes devoid of emotion. "You've been served." My fingers tightened around the documents, the thick paper feeling heavier than it should have been. A physical manifestation of the impending battle. I didn't have to open it to know what it was. The cold dread that had taken root weeks ago solidified into a hard, unyielding stone in my stomach. Still, I forced myself to walk to the kitchen table, exhaling sharply a long, controlled breath, before sliding my nail under the flap and pulling out the papers. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The heading screamed in bold letters. I skimmed down the page, my eyes darting across the legal jargon, until they landed on the section outlining the financial demands. Declan wasn't just leaving. He wanted half of everything: the condo, the car, 50% of our shared assets, every piece of property we had acquired together. And because he had the audacity, the sheer, breathtaking gall, he was also demanding spousal support. I let out a bitter, hollow laugh, a sound devoid of humor, shaking my head slowly. Of course. Of course. He thought he could take everything. Strip me bare, leave me financially ruined. He had been planning this for months, probably longer, meticulously setting up this grand heist. The man I married, or thought I married, was cold, yes. But this was calculated, a masterpiece of ruthless design. The distinct smell of polished wood and freshly printed documents filled the air as I sat across from my attorney, Patricia. Her office was a sanctuary of calm efficiency, a stark contrast to the storm raging within me. She flipped through the stack of papers Declan had served, her movements precise, deliberate. A faint, barely suppressed smirk played on her lips as she reached the financial breakdown, the section where Declan had so boldly laid out his outrageous demands. "Well," she said, tapping her perfectly manicured nails against the gleaming desk, a small, knowing smile now gracing her lips. "He's got nothing." I raised a brow, a flicker of surprise, then hope, stirring within me. Just like that. She glanced up, her eyes twinkling with amusement, a rare display of emotion. "Just like that. You moved everything into a trust before he even filed. That means legally, he has no access to those funds, to those assets. He can fight for spousal support, but considering your income history compared to his, and the dates of the transfers, it's simply not happening. He has no leg to stand on." I let out a slow, shuddering breath. The first truly deep breath I had taken in weeks. My shoulders finally released the tension I had been holding on to, a tight knot of anxiety that had resided there since that ominous knock on my door. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, for the first time in weeks, I felt truly, unequivocally in control. Declan had spent all this time, all these months, thinking he was the one orchestrating the game, pulling the strings, dictating the narrative. He had fatally underestimated me, blinded by his own arrogance and greed. That evening, a sense of quiet triumph buoyed me, as I finished pouring myself a generous glass of wine, the ruby liquid swirling enticingly in the crystal glass. The front door suddenly slammed open, shattering the peaceful quiet of my apartment. I didn't even flinch. Declan stood there, framed by the doorway, fury rolling off him in palpable waves, a dark aura of rage. His tie was loosened, pulled askew, and his jaw was clenched so tight, I swore I could hear his teeth grind. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" His voice was sharp, venomous, laced with raw, undiluted anger. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine, savoring the taste, savoring the way his anger twisted around him like a storm, futile and impotent. "I think I'm finally protecting myself," I replied, my voice calm, steady, betraying none of the inner turmoil he hoped to provoke. His hands curled into fists at his sides, his knuckles white. "You planned this," he accused, his voice hoarse with rage. I set my glass down, placing it carefully on the coffee table, tilting my head slightly, a small, knowing smile playing on my lips. "So did you." Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating with unspoken accusations, with the weight of shattered trust and broken promises. Then, finally, he exhaled sharply, a sound of frustrated defeat, his eyes darkening with a cold, simmering rage as he muttered, "This isn't over." I exhaled slowly, a quiet sigh of acceptance. I had won the first battle, yes, secured a crucial victory. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the war had just begun. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small, fragile sense of relief, a brief respite. Knowing that Declan had lost his financial grip on me, that he couldn't strip me bare, was a victory in itself. But I should have known better than to think he would walk away quietly, that he would accept defeat gracefully. Men like Declan don't simply retreat. The first subtle sign of trouble came at work. It started with looks, not the usual passing glances exchanged between colleagues, but lingering stares, suspicious and knowing. Then came the whispers, hushed conversations that cut off abruptly the second I entered the room, replaced by an awkward silence. By mid-morning, my assistant Rachel, a usually unflappable and direct woman, hesitated before stepping into my office, her body language radiating discomfort. "Hey, she began, wringing her hands, her gaze fixed on the floor. "I think you should know something." I glanced up from my laptop, my eyes already tired, my mind wary from the constant vigilance. "What is it, Rachel?" She shifted uncomfortably, her reluctance palpable. "There's a rumor going around," she finally confessed, her voice barely a whisper. I wasn't going to say anything, but she trailed off, her hands still twisting nervously. "Just tell me." I urged, my voice firm, impatient. Rachel hesitated again, then sighed, as if steeling herself. "People are saying you took money from your joint accounts. That you were." She swallowed hard, the words clearly difficult for her to utter. "Laundering funds." I stared at her, the words landing like a physical slap, a stinging blow to my face. "What?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I don't believe it," she added quickly, her voice laced with genuine distress. "But Declan, he's been talking to people. Lawyers, mutual friends, anyone who will listen. The story's spreading, Saraya. It's everywhere." My stomach twisted, a cold knot forming, and fury, hot and consuming, rose in my chest like wildfire. Declan wasn't just trying to take my money, to leave me destitute. He was trying to ruin me, to systematically destroy my professional reputation, to poison my relationships. By the time I got to my lawyer's office, I was barely holding it together, my composure stretched thin. "This needs to stop. Now." I slammed the stack of printed screenshots onto Patricia's desk, the flimsy papers rattling. My hands were shaking with barely suppressed rage. My lawyer, Patricia, glanced at them, her expression calm, then let out a dry, knowing chuckle. "Well," she said, leaning back in her chair, a glint of steel in her eyes. "He's certainly desperate." "He's slandering me," I accused, my voice tight with indignation. "Yes," she conceded, tapping her pen against her desk, her gaze thoughtful. "But we can use that. If he's running around making false claims, he's opening himself up to defamation charges. We send a cease and desist first. If he ignores it, we escalate." I clenched my jaw, the muscle ticking. "I don't want this to drag out in court, Patricia. I just want him to stop. I want him to leave me alone." Patricia sighed, her expression softening slightly. "He's trying to bait you, Saraya. He wants you to react emotionally, to make a mistake." "She's right." A voice chimed in. I turned to see Beatrice, Patricia's formidable colleague, standing by the door, a knowing, empathetic look on her face. "You can't let him dictate your next move." Beatrice continued, stepping forward, her voice firm and steady. "You react too fast, too emotionally, and he wins. You give him exactly what he wants." I swallowed my anger, forcing it down, nodding stiffly, acknowledging the truth in their words. But inside I was seething, a volcano of suppressed fury. Declan wanted a fight, a bitter, drawn-out war. He was about to get one on my terms. I found him at La Rue, one of the city's most exclusive, most expensive restaurants, a place where often conducted his power lunches. He was laughing, a loud, self-satisfied sound, over drinks with two well-known colleagues, his head thrown back in a display of utter casualness. The sight of him sitting there, completely unfazed, perfectly at ease, like he hadn't spent the past few days systematically dragging my name through the mud, destroying my professional reputation with baseless accusations, made my blood boil. But I didn't cause a scene. I didn't scream. I didn't throw a drink. I didn't need to. I simply walked up to the table, my posture straight, my expression unreadable, leaned down close to his ear, and whispered, just loud enough for him to hear. "You have no idea what you've just started, Declan. This is far from over." Declan's smirk faltered for a split second, a flicker of surprise, perhaps even fear, crossing his face before he expertly masked it with an easy, practiced grin. He wiped his mouth with a crisp linen napkin, his eyes gleaming with a cold challenge, a hunger for battle. "Let's see what you've got then, Saraya," he drawled, his voice low, confident. I had given him one last warning, a final chance to retreat. Now I was done playing fair. Declan had spent weeks, months, trying to manipulate, intimidate, and control me. He had underestimated me at every turn, misjudged my resilience, my capacity for self-preservation. Now, after failing to take my money, after failing to provoke me into an emotional outburst, after attempting to smear my name and ruin my reputation, he was taking one final, desperate shot. A desperate man I knew was a dangerous one, capable of anything. I was halfway through my morning coffee, the bitter liquid still hot on my tongue, when my phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. "Patricia," I answered, sensing the urgency in her silence before she even spoke a word. "You need to come in," my lawyer said without preamble, her voice tight with a suppressed tension. "Declan just filed a motion for a full financial audit." The words sent a sharp, painful jolt through my body, a cold shock. I set my mug down carefully, inhaling deeply, trying to calm the sudden tremor in my hands. "On what grounds?" I managed to ask, my voice surprisingly steady. Patricia exhaled a long, weary sigh. "He's claiming you mismanaged joint funds, that you owe him a financial settlement, that you misappropriated assets." It's complete nonsense, of course, but that's not the point. Of course, it wasn't. He's trying to drain me, I muttered, the realization dawning on me with chilling clarity. Legal fees, time, stress. He knows he can't win outright, so he wants to wear me down, exhaust me until I give in. Exactly. Patricia confirmed, her voice grim. A sharp bitterness curled in my chest, a potent mixture of anger and cold resolve. Declan never played to win outright, to land the decisive knockout blow. He played to exhaust his opponent, to bleed them dry, to wear them down through attrition. Not this time. "I'll be there in an hour," I said before hanging up, my voice firm, resolute. By the time I walked into Patricia's office, she already had Declan's latest motion spread across her desk, pages annotated furiously in red ink, highlights and notes scrawled in the margins. "Here's the good news," she said, looking up, a faint smirk playing on her lips. "He doesn't have a single piece of legitimate evidence to back up his claims." Not one. I felt a flicker of triumph, a small victory in the ongoing war. "The bad news," I prompted, knowing there always was a bad news with Declan. This could still drag out for weeks, maybe even months. If the court entertains his tactics, if they grant him the audit, it's designed to be a time and money sink. I clenched my fists, my jaw tight. "What's our next move, Patricia? How do we stop this?" "We'll counter file," she said, her voice decisive, "and request an immediate dismissal of his motion. We also demand that he pay for all legal costs if the court deems this a frivolous filing, a clear stall tactic." I smirked, a genuine, cold smile. "Let's do it." 2 weeks later, I found myself sitting across from Declan in a sterile courtroom, the air thick with tension. He was dressed sharp, impeccably tailored, his tie a little too tight, almost choking him. His usual arrogant smirk was barely concealed, a faint curve to his lips. He thought this was his moment, his grand triumph. His lawyer stood first, a portly man with an air of self-importance. "Your Honor," he began, his voice booming slightly, "my client has reason to believe that Mrs. Keller improperly moved assets to avoid a fair divorce settlement. We are requesting a full forensic audit of all financial transfers made in the past 6 months, as we suspect fraud." I didn't react, didn't flinch, my face a mask of calm composure. Patricia, calm and collected as ever, adjusted her glasses, her eyes sharp and intelligent, and stood. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and precise, cutting through the lawyer's bluster. "All of my client's financial moves were made before Mr. Keller even filed for divorce. There is absolutely no evidence of mismanagement or fraud, as all transactions were executed within legal boundaries, and well before any formal dissolution proceedings began. She slid a thick binder forward, placing it firmly on the judge's bench. Additionally, Your Honor, we request that this motion be dismissed with prejudice, and that Mr. Keller be required to cover all legal fees associated with this claim, as this is a clear, vexatious attempt at financial harassment, designed solely to drain my client's resources. The judge, a stoic woman with piercing eyes, took their time reviewing the documents, her expression unreadable, giving nothing away. The room was tense silent, the air crackling with anticipation. Declan was watching me, his gaze fixed, waiting for me to squirm, to show any sign of weakness. I didn't give him the satisfaction. Finally, the judge looked up, her gaze sweeping across the courtroom, then settling on Declan. The court finds no grounds for a full financial audit, she declared, her voice firm, leaving no room for doubt. The motion is denied. A sharp gasp escaped Declan's lawyer, quickly stifled. Furthermore, the judge continued, due to lack of evidence, and the apparent nature of this filing as a harassing tactic, Mr. Keller will be responsible for all legal fees associated with this claim. A sharp, decisive clap of the gavel echoed through the silent courtroom, sealing his fate. Just like that, Declan had lost again. Outside the courtroom, the air felt crisp, almost celebratory. Declan walked past me without a word, his face pale, his jaw still clenched, his eyes avoiding mine. But as he passed, he muttered, just loud enough for me to hear, a venomous hiss. You think this is over? Just wait. I had won this round, yes, scored a significant victory. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me, that Declan still had one last move left. Men like him don't walk away quietly. They don't accept defeat, not truly. They regroup, re-strategize, and come back with something even worse, something more desperate. And Declan. He had been plotting this too long, had invested too much of his cold, calculated self, to let it end here. I didn't have to wait long to find out what his final, desperate move was. The call came the very next morning. Before I had even finished my first cup of coffee. Saraya, we have a problem. Patricia's voice said, tight with urgency. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles white. What now? There was a pause, a significant, unsettling silence. Then the distinct sound of papers shuffling on the other end of the line. Declan and Ilya have filed a formal complaint. Patricia continued, her voice grim. They're accusing you of financial fraud. According to their evidence, you've been falsifying financial records for months, fabricating transactions. I felt the air leave my lungs in a sudden, sharp whoosh. This wasn't just about money, about losing assets. If this accusation stuck, if it gained traction, I wouldn't just lose money. I could be facing actual legal consequences. A criminal investigation, a ruined career, a tarnished reputation that would follow me forever. They submitted documents. Patricia continued, her voice taut, betraying the severity of the situation. If the court takes this seriously, you'll be forced into a criminal investigation. This is a big one, Saraya. The world tilted slightly, my vision blurring at the edges. I pressed my fingers against my temple, willing myself to stay calm, to think clearly, to breathe. And the documents? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Are they real? Are they legitimate? A scoff, sharp and dismissive, came from the other end of the line. Absolutely not. But they're good. Someone doctored them well, meticulously crafted them to look convincing. Of course. Ilya. The invisible hand guiding Declan's every malicious move. The shadowy figure pulling the strings behind the scenes. But Patricia added a sudden, almost imperceptible flicker of hope in her tone. I had Beatrice take a look at them before calling you. And she found something. A crucial detail. My heart leaped. What? What did she find? She recognized the timestamps on the alleged financial transfers. Patricia explained, her voice gaining a renewed energy. Someone forged them, But they made a critical, amateur mistake. They didn't realize one key detail. Those accounts didn't even exist when those transactions supposedly took place. They were created as after the alleged dates. I let out a sharp, incredulous exhale, a mixture of shock and dawning triumph. That was it. That was the mistake, the fatal flaw in their meticulously constructed lie. That was the detail that would ruin them, that would expose their malicious fraud. My fear, which had been a cold, suffocating blanket, burned away, replaced by something sharper, something potent and invigorating, a fierce, unyielding resolve. Declan wanted a war. Fine. I was about to end it, definitively and irrevocably. By the time I arrived at Patricia's office, my decision was made, solidified into an unshakable conviction. I wasn't just going to defend myself to clear my name. I was going to go on the offensive. I was going to bury them, both Declan and his accomplice. I want to go on the offensive, I said, placing my palms flat on her polished desk, my gaze steady, unwavering. Not just to clear my name. I want to take them down, permanently. Patricia studied me for a moment, her expression thoughtful, assessing my resolve. Then, a slow, satisfied smile spread across her face. Good, she said, her voice firm. Because we have enough to do it. She motioned to a folder lying open on her desk. We contacted a forensic financial analyst immediately. They've confirmed what Beatrice found. The documents were meticulously doctored, completely fabricated. She smiled, sharp and triumphant. So, here's what we do. We file a motion proving the documents are fraudulent, presenting the analyst's findings as irrefutable evidence. Then, we sue Declan and Ilya for defamation, for malicious prosecution, and for the submission of falsified legal evidence. I nodded, my eyes gleaming with a cold satisfaction. And I want full damages. Everything they have. Patricia leaned back in her chair, clearly pleased, a quiet satisfaction in her posture. I thought you might say that. 2 weeks later, I faced Declan in court for what would be the last time, the final, decisive battle in our bitter war. I watched him closely as Patricia laid out our case, her voice precise, authoritative, carrying clearly across the silent courtroom. These documents submitted as evidence against my client, Mrs. Saraya Keller, were fabricated, she stated, her words resonating with conviction. We have irrefutable proof, Your Honor, that the financial transactions listed never happened. They are a malicious fabrication designed to mislead this court and destroy my client's reputation. The forensic analyst, a calm, meticulous woman, then took the stand, detailing every false timestamp, every manipulated number, every single piece of doctored evidence with chilling precision. Declan's lawyers squirmed, their faces pale, their whispered consultations growing more frantic. They knew they were losing, irrevocably. Then came the final crushing blow. Patricia placed a new, damning folder on the judge's desk, the papers rustling softly in the profound silence of the courtroom. Your Honor, she announced, her voice rising slightly. In light of these fraudulent accusations, and the clear malicious intent to defame my client, Mrs. Keller is countersuing Mr. Keller and his associate Ilya Moro for defamation and the deliberate submission of falsified legal evidence. The silence in the courtroom was deafening, thick with the weight of the revelation. Declan's lawyer, his face ashen, turned to him, whispering something urgent, his voice a frantic buzz. Declan's jaw was locked, his face pale, a mask of stunned defeat. Finally, his lawyer stood, clearing his throat, his voice weak. Your Honor, he stammered, my client wishes to withdraw his claims. All of them. Of course he did. He had no choice, no avenue left to him. The judge nodded, her expression grim, but resolute. Motion dismissed, she declared, her gavel striking the bench with a sharp, final crack. Furthermore, Mr. Keller will be responsible for all legal costs, and the court will consider pursuing charges for the submission of fraudulent documents. Declan had lost. Completely. Utterly. And spectacularly. As we exited the courthouse, the setting sun casting long shadows, Declan walked past me without a word, his shoulders slumped, his once arrogant swagger completely gone. I didn't stop him, didn't call out his name, didn't need to. I let him take a few steps, his footsteps heavy and defeated, before I whispered, just loud enough for him to hear. "We're done here, Declan." For the first time in months, I felt something I had almost forgotten, a profound, serene sense of peace. No more court hearings, no more legal threats, no more whispers in the dark. No more waking up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding, dreading what new malicious scheme Declan would conjure next. I had won. It didn't feel like some grand, explosive victory. Not in the way I had imagined, with fireworks and triumphant shouts. There were no dramatic final words, no climactic confrontation. Just silence. The kind of silence that comes after a violent storm, when the sky is still heavy with residual clouds. But the thunder has rolled away, and the destructive winds have ceased. And for the first time, that silence didn't scare me. It was a promise of quietude, of healing. 2 days later, I met with Patricia for the last time. She slid a final stack of papers across her desk, crisp and definitive. "It's done," she said, a sense of closure in her voice. Declan signed the settlement. Everything is finalized. I exhaled slowly, a deep, cleansing breath, my fingers hovering over the documents for a moment, tracing the crisp edges, before finally picking them up. I scanned through the details, even though I already knew the outcome, the sweet taste of victory lingering on my tongue. Declan got nothing, not a dime. His initial financial claims dismissed, his malicious defamation case against me backfired spectacularly, and his carefully constructed reputation was utterly ruined, shattered beyond repair. He had tried to destroy me, to strip me of everything I had, and in the end, it was he who was left with nothing, a hollow shell of a man. Patricia leaned back in her chair, watching me, a thoughtful expression on her face. "How do you feel, Saraya?" she asked gently. I let out a quiet laugh, more of an exhale, a release of lingering tension than a sound. "Lighter," I murmured, a genuine smile finally reaching my eyes. She smiled back, a warm, knowing smile. "Good. You deserve that." I nodded, slipping the documents into my bag, a final, tangible symbol of my reclaimed freedom. This was it, the final step, the last chapter of a harrowing ordeal. I stood, extending my hand across the desk. "Thank you, Patricia, for everything. You saved me." She shook it firmly, her grip strong and reassuring. "Go enjoy your life, Saraya. You've earned it, every single moment of peace and freedom." And for the first time in a long, long time, I believed her. Truly believed her. That evening, Beatrice and my mother, Margot, insisted on a victory dinner, a celebration of my resilience. Margot greeted me with a warm, comforting hug as I stepped into her home, her eyes full of profound relief. "It's over," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes," I murmured, my own voice imbued with a quiet certainty. "It is." Beatrice poured champagne into tall flutes, the bubbles sparkling, raising her glass with a mischievous grin, her eyes twinkling. "To freedom," she declared, "and to never, ever letting a man think he can outsmart you again." I clinked my glass against hers, the delicate sound resonating with triumph, laughing freely, genuinely. "I'll drink to that." We ate, we talked, we reminisced, sharing stories and laughter. And for the first time in months, I wasn't constantly looking over my shoulder, wasn't waiting for the next hit, the next blow, the next painful twist. The war was finally, definitively over. Later that night I stood on my balcony, gazing out at the magnificent Chicago skyline. The city lights shimmered and sparkled, stretching infinitely into the horizon, a breathtaking tapestry of human endeavor and endless possibility. Everything felt different. I was no longer the woman who had ignored the subtle warning signs, who had willingly turned a blind eye to the creeping shadows of deceit. No longer the woman who had believed, perhaps naively, in the illusion of safety, of permanence, of an unbreakable bond. I had lost things, yes. I had lost my unquestioning trust, precious time, and a version of love I thought I had, a carefully constructed fantasy that had shattered into a million pieces. But I had gained infinitely more. I had gained an undeniable strength, a profound clarity of vision, and an unshakable sense of control over my own destiny. My phone vibrated softly on the small table beside me, pulling me momentarily from my reverie. I glanced at the screen. Unknown number. I didn't hesitate, didn't even consider answering. Block. I turned back to my laptop, opening a blank document, the cursor blinking expectantly on the pristine white page. A new chapter. A new story. My story. As I closed my laptop, a quiet, resolute whisper escaped my lips, carried away by the gentle night breeze. This is my story now. Before we wrap up, let me leave you with something to think about, a truth I learned the hard way. Life has a peculiar, often cruel, way of testing us in the moments we least expect, when we feel most secure. Sometimes, the people we trust the most, the ones we invite closest to our hearts, are the very ones who betray us the deepest, who inflict the most profound wounds. But here's what I've learned, what this harrowing journey has etched into my very soul strength, isn't about avoiding betrayal. It's not about escaping the pain or pretending it never happened. True strength is about how you rise after it, how you rebuild yourself, piece by painful piece, how you reclaim your shattered dignity. When I stood at the precipice of my marriage, at the edge of utter devastation, I could have let it break me. I could have succumbed to the consuming fear and debilitating doubt, allowed them to swallow me whole. But instead, I chose to fight. Not just for my finances, not just for my tangible assets, but for my dignity, for my freedom, and for the promise of my own future. And if there's one thing, one solitary truth, I hope you take from this story, it's this: you are stronger than you think. Infinitely stronger. If you've ever been blindsided by betrayal, if you've ever felt like the rug was brutally pulled from under you, leaving you suspended in a terrifying void, know this: you are not alone. Life may throw its absolute worst at you. It may test your limits, push you to the brink. But it is precisely in those dark, challenging moments that you discover who you truly are, the unyielding resilience that resides within you. And sometimes, walking away from what no longer serves you, from what seeks to diminish or destroy you, is the greatest victory of all. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced a situation where you had to fight for yourself, fiercely and relentlessly, even when the odds seemed overwhelmingly against you? Share your thoughts, your experiences, your own battles in the comments below. I read every single one of them. And if this story resonated with you, if it stirred something within your own spirit, drop a 1 in the comments or tell me where you're watching from in the world. And of course, if you want to hear more stories like this, more tales of resilience, strength, and reclaiming power, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. There's so much more to come, so many more stories to share. Until next time, stay strong, stay smart, and never, ever let anyone take away your power.